Imagine relaxing by your own pool, only to be accused of trespassing because of how you look. What happens next at Magnolia Creek isn't just shocking, it changes an entire community forever. It was a peaceful late afternoon at the Magnolia Creek residences, the Texas sun casting a warm glow on the pool's surface. Dante Hayes, a 32-year-old software engineer, reclined on a lounge chair, savoring the rare tranquility after completing a demanding work project. With a book in hand and a cold lemonade by his side, he let himself unwind in the serene atmosphere. For the first time in weeks, he felt truly at ease, surrounded by nothing but the sound of children playing and the occasional splash in the water. But the calm didn't last. A sharp set of footsteps interrupted his focus, drawing his gaze up. A woman in her mid-50s with meticulously styled blonde hair and oversized sunglasses approached him with a look that seemed both curious and judgmental. Dante recognized her from the complex, though they'd never spoken before. As she neared, her eyes locked onto him with an unsettling intensity. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clipped. "Do you live here?" Dante, taken aback by the directness of the question, sat up slightly. "Yes, I do," he replied, trying to keep his tone steady. Her eyes narrowed, and her skepticism was palpable. "Really?" she pressed, her voice rising a notch. "I've never seen you around before. Are you sure you're not just visiting someone?" Dante's pulse quickened, sensing the subtle accusation hidden in her words. He didn't know what to make of it, but he answered calmly, "I'm sure. Apartment 304. I've lived here for 2 years." The woman's lips pursed, clearly unsatisfied with his answer. "If that's true," she said, her voice sharpening, "you should have your keycard. Let's see it." The demand struck Dante as strange, but he remained composed. "I'm not obligated to show you anything," he said, keeping his voice firm. "If you have an issue, feel free to contact management." Her face flushed with indignation, and without further hesitation she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling security," she snapped, her words ringing through the pool area, drawing the attention of the nearby residents. Dante sighed inwardly, but he wasn't about to let her ruin his peaceful afternoon. He kept his posture relaxed, glancing back down at his book, refusing to give in to the tension she was trying to create. The woman's voice carried through the air, loud enough for the nearby residents to hear. "Yes, I'm at the pool. There's someone here who doesn't belong. He says he lives here, but I've never seen him before. I need security to come down immediately." The words were sharp, dripping with a sense of authority, as if her claim was undeniable. Dante felt the weight of the onlookers' stares, the tension in the air thickening. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others appeared uncomfortable, watching the unfolding scene with keen interest. Dante remained unmoved, sitting back in his chair, his book still open but unread. He could feel the sting of the woman's insinuations, but he refused to engage in the escalating drama. Instead, he let her call for security, his mind focused on maintaining his calm. He knew he had done nothing wrong, and no matter what she said, that wouldn't change. Moments later, a young security guard appeared at the entrance, his eyes flicking between the woman and Dante. He seemed uncertain, caught in the tension of the moment. The woman, eager for validation, waved him over with an exaggerated gesture. "Thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice laced with triumph. "This man refuses to leave. He says he lives here, but I'm certain he doesn't. He won't even show me his keycard." The guard hesitated, glancing from the woman to Dante, then back to her. Dante stood up, his presence solid and composed. "I do live here," he said, his voice steady. "Apartment 304. You can verify it with management if you need to." The security guard looked at the key card Dante produced from his wallet, scanning the details. His face flushed slightly as he nodded. "That checks out," he said quietly, handing the card back to Dante. "Sorry for the trouble, sir." The woman's expression faltered, her face reddening with disbelief. "Wait, you're just going to take his word for it?" she demanded, her earlier confidence slipping. The guard, sensing the shift in power, spoke firmly. "Ma'am, he's provided the necessary proof. There's nothing else to discuss." For a brief moment, silence hung in the air, thick with the weight of the truth. The tension began to dissipate, but before the situation could fully resolve, a voice rang out from across the pool. Enough is enough! The voice that broke the silence came from Sylvia Monroe, an older woman in her late 60s, who had been quietly watching the scene unfold from the far side of the pool. Dressed in a floral sundress and a wide-brimmed hat, she stood with an air of quiet authority. Dante glanced at her as she made her way toward the small gathering, her movements purposeful yet calm. The onlookers watched in anticipation, sensing that something was about to shift. Sylvia stopped just a few feet from the woman who had caused the commotion. Her eyes locked onto the accuser, a sharpness in her gaze that seemed to pierce through the woman's defensiveness. "Excuse me," Sylvia began, her voice firm and unapologetic, "but this isn't the first time this has happened, and I think it's about time someone said something." The accusing woman turned, caught off guard by the sudden interruption. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her tone defensive. But Sylvia wasn't backing down. "Oh, don't play coy," Sylvia shot back, her words cutting through the air. "You've been harassing people in this complex for months, and we're all tired of it. Just last week you accused the delivery driver of loitering just because he was taking a lunch break in his truck. And don't think we've forgotten the time you called the cops on the college kids moving into their apartment because they looked suspicious." The woman's face reddened, and her mouth opened, but no words came out. Sylvia continued, undeterred. "And now this. Calling security on a man who's done nothing wrong just because you don't recognize him. You're embarrassing yourself." A murmur rippled through the small crowd, some nodding in agreement, others looking visibly uncomfortable. The accusing woman, once so certain of herself, stood frozen, her posture now deflated. The crowd's attention had completely shifted, and Dante could feel the weight of the moment. The injustice that had been done now laid bare for everyone to see. The woman's defenses crumbled. "This is absurd," she muttered under her breath, gathering her things in a flurry of embarrassment. Without another word, she turned and walked quickly away from the pool, her shoulders hunched, leaving behind a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Sylvia, her gaze softening, turned back to Dante. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said gently. "It's not right, and it's not fair." Dante nodded, a small smile breaking through his calm exterior. He appreciated the support, but more importantly, he recognized that things had just changed. The community, for the first time, had stood up for what was right. The quiet after Sylvia's words settled like a heavy fog, and Dante allowed himself a brief moment to exhale. The tension that had filled the air just minutes ago seemed to dissipate, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. The crowd, which had been so eager to watch the spectacle unfold, now seemed unsure of how to move forward. Eyes flicked nervously between each other, some still lingering on Dante, others shifting awkwardly. Yet, as the moment stretched on, something powerful began to emerge. Solidarity. The shift wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. People started to speak up, breaking the silence with hushed murmurs, offering quiet words of support for Dante. A young couple who had been watching the situation from across the pool exchanged a glance before one of them approached Dante. "I'm sorry that happened," the young woman said, her voice soft but firm. "That was completely out of line. I've lived here for years, and I've never seen someone act like that." Dante nodded, appreciating her words, but it wasn't just her that he noticed. The young man beside her stepped forward as well, extending a hand in silent solidarity. More people followed suit, their discomfort with the earlier events manifesting in small but significant gestures. Eleanor, standing to the side with a watchful eye, had sparked something more than just an apology. She had initiated a shift in the complex, a turning point, where people who had once quietly observed felt compelled to stand up, even if only with a few simple words or actions. "Don't let her get away with making you feel small," Sylvia Monroe called out, her voice still carrying authority. "You're here because you belong here. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." The power of her statement hung in the air, and for the first time Dante Hayes felt more than just a sense of frustration. He felt empowered. He stood tall, meeting the eyes of those around him. The moment of tension had passed, and what lingered in its wake was something far more important. A community beginning to recognize its own power to stand up to injustice, no matter how small or large. This wasn't just about him, it was about everyone who had ever felt unwelcome, marginalized or silenced. And for Dante, it was a realization that change didn't always come with grand gestures. It often began with a quiet, firm stand for what was right. The hum of voices gradually softened as the woman retreated, her departure leaving a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Dante remained rooted by the poolside, his calmness settling into a quiet resolve. The murmurs around him swirled, but there was an unspoken understanding. Things had changed, even if only in this small corner of Magnolia Creek. The old walls of unspoken tension had started to crack, and with every passing second, the complex felt just a little more like a community. Sylvia Monroe, who had spoken out when no one else would, stood still by the edge of the pool. Her weathered face, softened by years of experience, now bore an expression of quiet satisfaction. Her gaze met Dante's briefly before she turned back to the crowd. "You've done well," she said, her words carrying a weight of years spent navigating life's injustices with grace. The crowd had started to disperse, and though many of the residents returned to their own spaces, Dante could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't just Sylvia's words that resonated with him. It was the fact that she had acted when no one else had. She had stood up and spoken truth when it would have been so easy to let it slide into oblivion. It made him realize something important. Change didn't always come in loud, decisive moments. Sometimes it came in the quiet, steady determination to simply do what was right. As Dante gathered his things, ready to leave the poolside, his thoughts kept returning to the outpouring of support that had followed the confrontation. Even the younger couple, Lena and Jax, who had watched from afar, had approached him, offering an apology, their eyes wide with realization. It was subtle, but it was there, a community beginning to rebuild its foundation, brick by brick. The next morning, as Dante walked to the leasing office for a meeting with the management, the ripple effects of the previous day were already being felt. People greeted him with nods, some even with small smiles. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The kind of change he had hoped for wasn't going to be easy or immediate, but as he stepped into the office, the first flicker of real progress hung in the air. As Dante stepped into the leasing office, the weight of the situation settled around him once more. The air was heavy with unspoken tension, but this time it was different. The manager, Charlotte Bloom, had already reviewed the viral video. She greeted him with a more measured expression than he had expected, her earlier neutrality replaced by something resembling. "I saw the footage, Dante," Charlotte Bloom began, her tone firm yet sympathetic. "What happened at the pool yesterday should never have taken place." The words weren't just an acknowledgement of his experience. They were an acknowledgement of a broader issue that had long been swept under the rug. Dante felt a slight shift inside himself, a growing sense of vindication. For once, the complex's management seemed ready to take a stand. "I appreciate you taking this seriously," he replied, the calmness in his voice a direct reflection of how far the conversation had come. He wasn't just there for himself anymore. He was representing something larger. A voice for those who had been silenced by the weight of prejudice, unnoticed and ignored. Charlotte Bloom continued, her voice growing more resolute. "We'll be handling this situation with Vivian Fox. She'll be receiving an official warning, and further behavior like this will not be tolerated." Dante nodded, though he knew this wouldn't be enough. But it was a start, one that might inspire real change within Magnolia Creek. As he left the office, Dante's steps felt lighter, the burden of the previous day's tension lifting slightly. He had never imagined that standing up for his right to simply exist in a space would lead to this. But it had, and in that moment, Dante knew that the ripple of change he had sparked was only beginning to grow. The following days were a whirlwind of messages, interviews, and unexpected attention for Dante. What had started as an uncomfortable altercation by the pool had spiraled into a larger conversation about racial profiling and accountability. Dante's phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from friends, strangers, and even organizations offering support. His calm demeanor during the confrontation had not only diffused a tense situation, it had sparked a movement. Yet, amid the praise, there were still some who criticized him. Some called him an opportunist. Others claimed he had overreacted, making a spectacle out of what they perceived as a simple misunderstanding. But Dante knew this was bigger than him. This wasn't just about a moment at the pool, it was about something more ingrained. It was about the daily struggles faced by those who looked like him, the silent assumptions made based on appearances, and the power dynamics that often went unnoticed. The ripple effect of his story continued to spread throughout Magnolia Creek. Charlotte Bloom, having witnessed the public outcry, arranged a series of workshops on inclusivity and unconscious bias within the complex. The once divided community slowly began to heal, with residents engaging in open dialogue. The whispers that had once lingered in the hallways now transformed into discussions, real conversations about how they could create a safer, more welcoming environment for everyone. Dante had never imagined the depth of change his simple act of standing his ground would trigger. It wasn't easy, no change ever is, but as he walked through the complex now, the atmosphere had shifted. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now greeted him with genuine smiles, and he couldn't help but feel the collective weight of the transformation. In the end, the story of Magnolia Creek wasn't just about a confrontation at a pool. It was about people rising to hold each other accountable, no matter the fear or discomfort it may bring. It was about ensuring that everyone had the right to exist freely in a space without being questioned or diminished. Dante's quiet resilience had begun a movement, one that would be remembered long after the viral video faded from the headlines. The true victory wasn't just in the apology or the policies. It was in the shift of hearts and minds, one small act of courage at a time. The story of Dante and the incident at Magnolia Creek reflects a larger societal issue that continues to plague many communities today: racial profiling and the unfair assumptions made based on appearances. It highlights the importance of standing up against unjust behavior, no matter how uncomfortable it may feel in the moment. Just as Dante remained calm and composed in the face of harassment, we too can choose to respond with dignity and strength when faced with unfair treatment. One of the key takeaways from this story is the power of community support. It wasn't just Dante's calmness that shifted the narrative, but the collective response of the people around him, particularly Sylvia Monroe, who spoke up and challenged the unjust behavior. In our daily lives, it's crucial to stand up for what's right, especially when we witness others being mistreated. We must foster environments where inclusion, empathy, and accountability are not just ideals, but actions that we take to protect one another. Furthermore, the story also serves as a reminder that real change requires continued effort. It's not enough to simply call out bad behavior. We must actively work toward creating spaces where everyone feels valued and safe. Whether it's addressing bias, advocating for fairness, or engaging in open dialogue, these small actions contribute to a larger movement of progress, just as Dante's quiet strength did for Magnolia Creek.